The English you speak is not the English you think it is. And by the time you finish this, you will feel it, not just know it. Feel it in your chest. Because this is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. The words you call internet slang, Gen Z language, TikTok talk did not appear out of nowhere. They were not born in a boardroom or a brand deck or a quirky influencer's caption. Long before they were trending audio, they were survival code. Long before they were safe for commercials, they were dangerous on black tongues. This language was never random. That is the first truth most people miss. When people say, oh, that's just how the internet talks, they erase a people, a memory, a line of ancestors. Because what you call lit, woke, on fleek is giving, period. No cap, slay. Began as black sound, black rhythm, black grammar, bending English into a weapon and a shelter at the same time. On black mouths, this language is called ghetto, uneducated, broken. Teachers mark it wrong. Bosses call it unprofessional. Judges hear it and decide who sounds criminal. The same sentence, the same cadence, the same word. And suddenly, when it crosses into a different mouth, it becomes iconic, quirky, relatable, brand safe. The word did not change. The people did. There's a quiet violence in that shift. A phrase born from black pain gets stripped of its history, washed until it is colorless, then sold back to the world as entertainment. Woke was once a warning, a spiritual command to stay alert to racial terror. On fleek was a teenage black girl's spark of genius that the world repeated, imitated, monetized while she watched from the outside. Lit moved from black parties to festival posters to corporate tweets, leaving its creators unnamed. You need to understand, you are not just repeating cute phrases. You are carrying the echoes of chain gangs and church choirs, of jazz clubs and housing projects, of hip-hop ciphers and protest marches. This land of English you walk through every day is built on black roots, black rules that most people were never taught to see. This is not about memorizing vocabulary. This is about power, about how a people's creativity, pain, and genius can be mocked when they own it, then exalted once it is taken, about how civilizations are silenced not only by weapons and borders, but by whose words are called correct. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. You will hear woke, lit, on fleek, and you will hear the lives behind them. And then we will go further, because this did not happen once by accident. There is a pattern, almost a ritual. Black language is born, punished, stolen, cleaned up, then crowned as mainstream. Let us go back and walk that cycle step by step so you can see how deep this history runs and why you can never say it's just slang again. This is not just slang, reframing Black English as a whole language. So when people say it's just slang, they are already lost. They are staring at the spray off the wave and calling it the ocean. That is the first truth most people miss. When most people hear black slang, they imagine lazy grammar, memes, TikTok sounds, a few funny phrases that blow up and then disappear. They do not see a whole language standing behind every word. You need to understand this clearly. African American vernacular English is not broken English. It is not failed schoolwork. It is a full, rule-governed dialect, forged under pressure on this land, the child of African tongues English and the brutal grammar of enslavement. Linguists know this. They can map its patterns, trace its history, show you its logic. The world calls it improper. Science calls it systematic. Listen to one example. Habitual beat. When someone says, "Shall be working," it does not mean she is working right now. It means she works regularly, as a habit, as a rhythm in her life. One word, one tiny syllable, carrying tense, aspect, and time. That is grammar. That is precision. That is power. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning with what you were taught to disrespect. There are rules about when to drop a copula and when not to. There are rules about double negatives that follow patterns older than English itself. There are sound shifts, verb systems, ways of marking respect and disrespect that move like music but function like mathematics. This land has always held civilizations that encoded their knowledge in language, and Black English is one more line in that long, interrupted script. Yet look at how this language is treated. In schools, Black children are corrected, mocked, written off as uneducated for speaking the dialect they heard in their homes, in their churches, on their blocks. In workplaces, that same cadence is labeled unprofessional. 2, urban, a problem to be coached away. In media, it is the voice of the criminal, the joke, the side character whose words signal danger or comedy, but never authority. Then, watch what happens when the same patterns travel through music, the internet, and brands. A rapper bends verbs and turns nouns into verbs, and suddenly the world repeats it. A Black girl says "on fleek" once, and corporations stamp it on t-shirts. Woke moves from Black spiritual and political warning to a marketing slogan and then a punchline. The dialect that got punished in the classroom becomes the flavor that sells the commercial. This is not an accident. When you dismiss AAVE as slang, you are saying Black language is raw material to be mined, not culture to be honored. You are saying the people are disposable, but their creativity is not. That is the pattern. Take the rhythm, erase the drummer. Take the word, erase the world it came from. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it. Feel it in your chest. Because before we follow woke, stand, or on fleek along their path into the mainstream, you need to see the iceberg under the surface, the deep grammar, the old memory, the unpaid labor. Let us go back and watch how this language moves through this land, from the mouths that birthed it to the mouths that cash it in. The oldest story in a new accent. How Black language built modern, cool. Let us go back, because this story is older than the internet, older than television, older than the microphones that tried to contain it. Long before a hashtag could carry a phrase across the world in an hour, Black mouths were doing that work in real time, in real danger, in real communities that use language as armor, as code, as celebration. In the early 20th century, in jazz clubs thick with smoke and police suspicion, there were musicians calling each other hip, calling the scene cool, calling a good solo hot and a dangerous street bad. Short words, sharp words. But behind them stood entire civilizations of rhythm, because cool was not just temperature, it was a stance, a way to move through a world that wanted you dead without letting it see you sweat. That is the first truth most people miss. These words were survival techniques first, fashion accessories later. There were blues joints where a crib was not interior design. It was the one room you could afford. There were corners where a homie was not a cute nickname. It was the neighbor who might save your life. There were back rooms where dope was not a lazy adjective in an ad campaign. It was a coded way to talk about what was forbidden, what was powerful, what was ours. The language bent, meaning the same way jazz bent notes, sliding, flipping, refusing to sit still. When the civil rights movement rose, the language marched with it. Chants, call and response, sermons that stacked repetition on repetition until the words themselves started to shake the air. Stay woke. Move through black communities as a warning and a blessing, decades before pundits turned woke into an insult. You hear only the echo on television. You do not hear the church basement, the union hall, the whispered conversation on a bus through this land. Then hip-hop arrived, and the world pretended it was surprise. Ciphers on corners, mixtapes in trunks, DJs looping the break so MCs could loop the language, turning bad into good, ill into excellent, compressing whole biographies into a single bar. The courts called this speech criminal. Classrooms called it incorrect. Job interviews called it unprofessional. And at the same time, movies, commercials, and record labels were strip mining the slang, sanding off the danger, selling it back as urban flavor without the people who made it. By the time you reach Black Twitter, you're not looking at a new phenomenon. You're looking at an old river, finding a new channel. Threads, memes, reaction, images, the habit of turning a side eye into an entire sentence without moving your mouth. Algorithms feed on it. Brands imitate it. Influencers monetize it. Yet when black kids speak the same grammar offline, they are still marked as less educated, less serious, less human. And now TikTok, dances choreographed to black sounds, captions written in black cadences, slang from AAVE turned into global youth language in a month, while the original creators watch their words leave home and come back with someone else's name on the deed. You need to see that this is not an accident. This is a system. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning, because the pattern has never changed. It has only changed outfits, from jazz to blues to civil rights to hip hop to Black Twitter to TikTok. The cycle repeats. Innovate, stigmatize, extract, erase. The world tells you these words just appeared. That cool is American. That crib is neutral. That homie belongs to everyone. But under each of those words is a face, a neighborhood, a risk, a record that was never paid. And if you follow that trail era by era, you will see something even more unsettling. The exact moments when the same society that punishes black language decides it is time to cash it in. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. Because in the next part, we are going to slow this timeline down and step into those specific years, those specific scenes, and watch in detail how a phrase walks out of a black mouth and into the mainstream, and what gets lost or stolen along the way. Before internet slang, the hidden rules of black speech. So let us do what this world rarely does with black language. Let us slow down. Let us actually listen, not to the memes, not to the captions, to the sound of a black mouth moving through English like an instrument, bending this language the way a master bends a horn, pulling out notes you did not know were there. One word, stretched or clipped, can carry humor, threat, love, and a century of memory, depending on where the stress falls, how long the pause hangs, who's in the room listening. This speech has rhythm, call, and response. A joke that lands 3 beats after the punchline because the silence is part of the sentence. A side eye, functioning as punctuation. A drawn out man that is not just a word, but a verdict, a prayer, a warning, all at once. This land taught drums before it taught alphabets. That music did not disappear. It moved into the mouth. Most people are taught to hear this as broken English. That is the first truth most people miss. Because underneath what schools insult, there is grammar, there is structure, there is law. When someone says, "I'll be late," that is not a mistake. That be is habitual. It marks a pattern, a state of being, not a single moment. He late means right now. He be late means that is who he is. That is precision, not failure. Double negatives too. I don't know nothing. In classroom rules, that sentence is wrong. In the logic of AAVE, it is emphasis, intensification, a way to stack negation until the meaning is heavy enough to match the feeling. There are unique tense and aspect markers, ways of saying been or done, that tell you if something happened once, long ago and still matters, or happened recently and is already over. This is a system, consistent, rule-based, sharply expressive. You need to understand how this system was forged. Enslaved Africans, ripped from dozens of civilizations with their own tongues, were forced to English under whips and surveillance. They carried African patterns in their memory, tonal languages, call and response worship, proverbs that spoke sideways. Under a master's eye, plain speech could be death. So a new way of speaking grew. English on the surface, Africa in the bones. Meanings doubled and tripled so the people could talk to each other in front of power and not be fully heard. Black language became technology, a survival code, a way to joke in the middle of terror, to name the brutality of Rome and Carthage and every empire after without saying the master's name out loud. A way to build an in-group in a world designed to break it, to pass warning, to pass joy, to pass hope. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Because once you see that depth, watching those same patterns get flattened into quirky internet slang hits differently. In the next part, we step into the first big era where the world discovers this code, strips the danger out, keeps the flavor, and sells it back to you with the creators erased. Jazz, jive, and the first wave of stolen cool. So let us go back. Before TikTok sounds and viral audios, before corporate slogans pretending to be relatable, there were rooms filled with smoke, the brass, and black genius, bending sound and language at the same time. Picture it clearly. Small stages in Harlem and New Orleans, Chicago, and Kansas City. Horns crying out over clinking glasses. Drummers pushing the beat forward like a heartbeat that refused to be tamed. In those crowded dance halls, Black people were not just surviving another day in this land. They were inventing a new way to breathe, to move, to name the world on their own terms. Out of that pressure came a new tongue, jive talk, a language of rhythm and curve, a language that did not bow its head to white respectability. Words like hip, cat, cool, dig were not random slang. They were code. To be hip was to be awake, alert to danger and beauty. A cat was a man in the life, a participant, not a spectator. Cool was not temperature. It was armor. It was dignity under fire. This was not broken English. This was engineered speech, built from African patterns, Southern cadences, Bible echoes, and the raw reality of segregation. It carried playfulness, yes, but also warning, intimacy, and subtle rebellion. You need to understand that when Black people said, dig, they were not just asking, do you understand? They were asking, are you in this with me? Are you part of this circle, this quiet resistance? Then the doors opened just a crack. White audiences started coming into black clubs or bringing black bands onto white stages, while the law still drew lines on the floor and in the streets. The music was allowed to cross. The people were not. White critics wrote breathless reviews about how hip this new sound was, how cool these cats looked, even as those same musicians had to use back doors, could not sleep in the hotels they performed in, could not live fully in the cities their language electrified. Here is the pattern interrupt most people miss. The admiration was real, and the exclusion was real at the same time. White entertainers copied the slang in radio shows and comedy sketches. They put on exaggerated jive voices, turned black speech into a joke, a costume. Hollywood made the talk into caricature, a punchline, an exotic seasoning that could be sprinkled on a script to make it feel modern, while the originators were locked out of contracts, credits, and control. Yet even while the media mocked, it absorbed. Youth culture picked up cool and never let it go. Advertisers began to whisper hip into campaigns, selling cigarettes, cars, and soft drinks with a language born in segregated clubs. The words were washed of their danger, stripped of their link to black survival, and presented to the nation as just another American vibe. This land was witnessing its first clear cycle. Black communities forged a linguistic shield to survive and thrive. The dominant culture laughed at it, then looted it, then rewrote the story so that hip and cool belonged to everyone and to no one. That is the first truth most people miss. By the time the world calls it American slang, the hands that shaped it have already been pushed to the margins. And this is only the beginning. The same pattern will return with new sounds, new words, and even higher stakes. From soul to cool. How? Black power got rebranded for mass consumption. The world did not slow down after hip and cool was stolen. It accelerated. It moved into an era where black speech was not just entertainment, it was ammunition. From the 1950s through the 1970s, words were not decorations on this land. They were weapons, shields, prayers. Let us go back. Back to sanctuaries where preachers thundered and choirs answered, where say it loud was not a slogan yet, but a feeling rising in the throats of a people who had been told to whisper. Back to organizing meetings in basements and barbershops, where right on meant more than agreement. It meant, I see you, I stand with you, I will not move. Back to marches where soul did not mean a playlist. It meant the inner fire that slavery could not kill, the spiritual depth that segregation could not choke. There were sermons where every brother and sister restitched a torn community. There were protest chants that turned the sidewalks into sacred ground. There were speeches where black power and soul brother rang out like trumpets, calling a scattered people back into themselves. This language was not casual. It carried the weight of ancestors, the memory of change, the demand for a new world. And how did the dominant culture answer? On one side, with batons, wiretaps, and prison bars, with COINTELPRO files on preachers and poets, with cameras that framed black organizers as threats, criminals, radicals to be contained. On the other side, with cameras of a different kind, with record labels, fashion spreads, and television shows that stripped the danger but kept the flavor. That is the first truth most people miss. Repression and imitation walked hand in hand. Afros that once signaled resistance appeared in glossy magazines as daring new styles. Right on moved from meeting halls into late night talk shows, a catchphrase with the politics drained out. Soul traveled from the pulpit and the corner to neon signs. Soul food for tourists, soul records for suburban teens. Soul as a label slapped on anything that needed instant, marketable authenticity. Soul had meant the deep black spiritual essence of a people who survived the Middle Passage and Jim Crow. It became a vague marketing halo, a way to sell chicken, jeans, cars, and soft drinks to white consumers who loved the sound, but did not want the struggle. The word stayed, the context was erased, the prophet moved. You need to understand the violence in that. Language forged in the furnace of freedom fights was cool, polished, and sold back as a vibe. Words that once held tears, funerals, jail sentences, and midnight strategy sessions were emptied out until they floated, light enough to fit on a billboard. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. If even soul could be taken, softened, and repackaged for the same society that feared its original fire, what do you think happened when the next great wave came? When the children of this era picked up turntables and microphones and built a new language of survival, a new power, a new name for the world they saw. Hip hop is coming into the story, and the cycle is about to repeat on a scale most people are not ready to face. Hip hop didn't just change music, it rewired the dictionary. Hip hop did not arrive as entertainment. It arrived as an alarm. Children of this land in the burned out Bronx of the 1970s took what was left to them, streetlights, stairwells, turntables, microphone, and forged a new instrument to tell the world with no apology that they were still here. You need to understand that by the time you finish this, you will feel it. Let us go back. Picture the block parties, DJs dragging heavy speakers out onto cracked concrete, looping the break beats that made bodies move, while MCs stood over the noise and carved language into the air. There were no record deals yet, no corporate sponsors, just people turning rhythm into testimony, boasting, social commentary, survival reports from a city that had written them off. This was not a side note in history. This was a new civilization of sound being born in real time. From those parties came a tidal wave of words: dope, fresh, fat, homie, bling, crib, chill. Terms that began as private codes of recognition between neighbors, between crews, between those who knew the pressure of police sirens and overdue rent, started to ride the beats out of the boroughs. Mixtapes crossed bridges. Then radio caught the echo. Then MTV put it in rotation. And suddenly, teenagers in suburbs halfway across the world were repeating syllables forged in Black American struggle. That is the first truth most people miss. Hip hop did not just change music, it rewired the dictionary. The cadence, the metaphors, the flipped meanings. Bad meaning good, cold meaning impressive, hard meaning admirable. Reshaped how the world's youth spoke about power, style, danger, and desire. Linguists now admit that African American speech has its own grammar, its own internal law. But for decades, the same patterns were mocked as broken English until a rapper made them profitable. And while this language was climbing the charts, the people who birthed it were being condemned. Politicians called rap a disease. News anchors framed it as a threat, a corruption of morals, a glorification of violence. Parents were warned that these words would destroy their children, even as record labels, fashion houses, and media companies quietly harvested every syllable, turned it into slogans, shoe campaigns, luxury branding, and watched the profits pour in. Then came the next twist in the cycle. Non-black artists stepped into the sound, borrowed the slang, the flow, the posture, and were greeted not with fear, but with fascination. The same homie in crib that drew police attention in one neighborhood earned sponsorships and magazine covers in another. People who had never lived the reality behind the lyrics were given the rewards of the language, while the originators were still fighting to be paid, to be safe, to even be heard as human. Hip-hop opened the floodgates. Once the internet arrived, the speed of this extraction became almost impossible to see clearly. Words could leave a block in the Bronx at dawn and be global by nightfall, stripped of context, stripped of credit, celebrated as internet slang with no trace of the people who first spoke them. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning, and the next chapter will show you how the digital world turned that old pattern into a storm you can barely track in real time, let alone control or name. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. The pipeline, from the block to the billboard to your group chat. So let us go back and slow this storm down, frame by frame, and you will see there is a pipeline. It is not random. It is not harmless. It is a root of power. It begins where most people never look, in black communities, in AAVE spoken on porches, playgrounds, buses, in barbershops, and beauty salons, in the quiet codes of survival and joy. A word is born in the middle of a very specific struggle. A joke about police, a prayer in the church basement, a shout in the ballroom when a body hits the floor just right. This land of language is not abstract for these people. It is breath. From there, it moves into local scenes that already bend sound into power. There's the DJ calling it out over bass in a cramped club. There's the comedian on a small stage flipping it into a punchline. There's the choir remixing it into ad-libs. The ballroom commentator turning it into a verdict. A phrase like lit was first about heat you could feel in your skin. The night so alive it burned. The party where you forgot, for a second, that the world outside wanted you small. Then the cameras arrive. Not Rome's scribes this time, but phones, Vine, early YouTube, Black Twitter, Black Radio, BET. Those black media spaces become an echo chamber and an archive, catching the word, amplifying it, looping it. Lit starts showing up in captions, in reaction videos, in 6-second clips of black kids laughing in parking lots. The context is still there, but it is thinning. The edge softens. The struggle behind the joy fades from view. Pattern interrupt. Now, watch what happens when the algorithm wakes up. The wider internet grabs the echo, not the source. White influencers repeat it for laughs. Reaction channels mimic the cadence. The word becomes a meme, then a catchphrase. Record labels push artists who make that sound palatable. Casting agents choose the one black actor who will say it without making white audiences uncomfortable. Marketing teams slide it into scripts. That party was lit on a teen show. Our deals are lit in a brand's tweet. By the time corporate social media accounts are tweeting lit during a sale, the word has been fully sanitized. It is a slogan on a t-shirt in a mall far from the block that forged it. Gatekeepers, labels, casting directors, marketing executives, and now recommendation algorithms have decided whose mouth makes that word profitable. They choose the non-black creator for the sponsorship, the campaign, the billboard. And here is the wound you need to not just know, feel it in your chest. The same word that gets a black kid written up as unprofessional, ghetto, disrespectful in school becomes a quirky brand voice when a white intern types it, becomes a check when an influencer with the right face says it on TikTok. This pipeline is not neutral. It is built on the same racial hierarchies that named this land from the outside, that let Rome erase Carthage and then praise its ruins. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Language itself is being conquered, and the next section will show you what it means to fight for the right to name your own tongue, this time in your own mouth, on your own terms. Well, if it's improper, why does everyone copy it? If Black English is so wrong, why does the whole world borrow it the second it looks profitable? Why does language that is mocked in the classroom become the soundtrack of commercials, sitcoms, and viral trends the moment there is money on the table? This land was never one thing. That is the first truth most people miss. When they talk about African American vernacular English, they call it broken, lazy, uneducated. But when TV writers want a character to sound funny, when a brand wants to look relatable, when a non-black influencer wants to feel real, they reach straight for those same rhythms, those same words, those same patterns born from black survival. You see the contradiction in real lives. A black student writes how they actually speak and gets a red pen through every line, gets told to fix their grammar, to sound more professional. A black job applicant is coached to tone it down, to smooth out the edges of their voice, to leave certain words at home. The message is clear. Your language disqualifies you. Your tongue is a liability. Then you turn on the screen. Suddenly, those same phrases are currency. A white creator repeats on fleek and gets a sponsorship. Brands throw woke into ad campaigns without ever touching the political struggle. That word carried in black mouths as early as the 1930s. Everyday terms like cool, dope, crib, homie moved from jazz clubs and hip hop tracks into the center of the English-speaking world. And the people who paid the cost to create them are pushed to the edge once again. This is not an accident. This is power. The dominant group decides when a language is low status and when it suddenly becomes high status. They flip the switch. On black tongues, AAVE is a problem to be corrected. On non-black tongues, the same speech is authentic, in touch with the culture, youthful, innovative. The rules do not change. The mouth speaking them does. Sociolinguists have been tracing this pattern for decades. Marginalized speech is stigmatized as long as it is visibly tied to its originators. Then, once media, algorithms, and brands strip away the credit, it is rebranded as youth slang, as the new prestige accent of the internet, as the way everyone talks online. There were jazz musicians whose phrases were stolen. There were civil rights organizers whose words were softened. There were rappers whose slang was mined and resold. By the time it reaches you as just internet language, the history has been bleached out. And if you have ever laughed at a phrase, repeated a line, quoted a meme without knowing whose mouth it came from first, you need to sit with this. You may have helped that switch flip without even seeing the hand on it. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. Because next, we are going to follow specific words, from black neighborhoods to boardrooms. And once you see that journey, you will not just know it, you will feel it in your chest. Woke, from sacred warning to political punchline. So let us go back, not to a meme, not to a headline, but to a whisper passed between black people when the world refused to believe them. Before, woke was a punchline on cable news. It was a warning. It was sacred language for survival. In the 1930s, you already hear it in our music. Blues singer lead Belly sings about the Scottsboro Boys and tells his listeners to stay woke. That is the first truth most people miss. Woke was not cute. It was not quirky. It meant open your eyes, because this land is dangerous when you are black and unaware. It carried the weight of church sermons, of midnight talks on porches, of elders saying, baby, don't you ever forget where you are. For black communities, stay woke was an in-group alarm. Short, sharp, precise. It meant do not be lulled by polite smiles, by nice neighbors, by the illusion of safety. It meant do not sleep on what the police can do, what courts can do, what banks, schools, and hospitals can do while pretending to be neutral. In a world that gaslit black pain, that told people they were imagining racism, stay woke was the counterspell. The way you told each other, you are not crazy, you are not alone, you are seeing clearly. There were people using it in freedom schools. There were people using it in union meetings. There were people using it in quiet, private spaces where the cameras never went. Then it moved through the music again, through soul, through hip hop, through poetry and spoken word, into a new world of hashtags and timelines where police violence could no longer be hidden. By the time the movement for Black Lives rose up after Ferguson, stay woke had become a rallying cry online, a banner under videos of officers with their knees on necks and guns in backs. It was a demand for political awareness, for spiritual vigilance, for a refusal to look away. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. This word was built to keep people alive. Then the cameras turned. Then came the talk shows, the think pieces, the op-eds. Mainstream media grabbed woke and stretched it until it snapped. Overnight, it was no longer tied to police, to prisons, to the long, bloody history of this land. It became a lazy label for any diversity training, any gender discussion, any attempt to make the world less cruel. And then, even worse, it became a sneer. Woke turned into a joke politicians spit out to win applause, a culture war insult, a way to say too sensitive, too black, too loud, without using those words. The same syllable that once meant stay safe was twisted into sit down. That is not an accident. That is violence. Because when a word meant to protect black people is turned against them, the shield becomes a weapon. The name remains, but its power is drained, its origin erased, its people silenced. And yet this is only one word. Next, you need to see how this pattern repeats again and again until you recognize the whole language you live in. On fleek, viral fame, zero credit. Black language does not just get twisted, it gets stolen. And by the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. Let us go back, not to Rome or Carthage, but to a car, a phone, and a black teenager on a platform that does not even exist anymore. 2014, a Vine video. A young black girl who called herself Peaches Monroe looks into the camera, checks her reflection, and casually delivers a sentence that will echo across the world. We, in this bitch, finna get crunk. Eyebrows on fleek. One line, one moment, One name for a feeling everybody recognized but had never pinned down. That is the first truth most people miss. On fleek did not fall from the sky as a neutral internet phrase. It was born in the mouth of a black teen, shaped by the rhythms of African American vernacular English, a language people love to mock until they realize it moves the whole world. Within days, the clip spread. There were edits and remixes. There were people repeating it in classrooms and group chats. There were entire comment sections filled with on fleek as a new standard of perfection. Then the avalanche hit. Celebrities started saying it. Influencers wrote it in captions. Brands printed it on t-shirts, slapped it on eyebrow kits, built entire marketing campaigns around this one phrase. Fast food chains used it. Clothing companies used it. Makeup companies used it. On fleek became a slogan, a punchline, a hashtag, a currency. This land's biggest corporations, the same ones that treat black speech as unprofessional in the boardroom, suddenly could not get enough of it. But where was Peaches in all of this? While On Fleek generated clicks, sales, and cultural capital, the girl who named it watched from the sidelines. No early trademark, no team of lawyers, no management ready to turn virality into generational wealth. When she later tried to crowdfund to build her own cosmetic line, it exposed the quiet violence. A world that had already extracted her genius now hesitated to invest in her reality. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning, because Peaches' story is not an exception. It is infrastructure made visible. You need to see who owns the platforms where black kids create, who designs the algorithms that decide which faces get boosted, which accents get buried, which creators are brand safe, and which are labeled a risk. You need to see who walks into meetings with agents, lawyers, PR teams ready to monetize a phrase the moment it trends. Black creativity is treated as a public resource, free for the taking. There were jazz riffs taken and cleaned up. There were dances lifted from TikTok and sold on television. There were slogans from movements turned into ad copy. Over and over, the same pattern. Black people create the language of this land, and only when someone else repackages it does the real money arrive. And on fleek is just one word. Next, you will see how this entire civilization of speech, from woke to lit to period, has been mined the same way, until you recognize that the language you speak every day carries a history most people were never meant to see. Black Twitter, ballroom, and the words you swear came from TikTok, period, slay, yas, it's giving, read, shade. You hear them in TikToks, in brand campaigns, in the mouths of influencers who have never once had to defend their own way of speaking in a classroom or a job interview. To most people, these words feel like they belong to the internet, like they rose out of Wi-Fi and ring lights. But they did not. They rose out of people. This land of the timeline, the feed, the endless scroll, has its own underground cities, its own hidden civilizations, and you need to see who built them. Before TikTok, there was Vine. Before the algorithm crowned its favorites, there was Tumblr. Before viral sound was a marketing term, there was Black Twitter, pulsing like a heartbeat underneath the visible world. There were people gathering around hashtags the way earlier generations gathered around drums, using language to mourn, to laugh, to warn each other where the danger was. Let us go back. Shade and read did not begin as quirky captions. They come from black queer and trans ballroom culture, from drag scenes where language was a weapon and a shield, a way to slice through hypocrisy and still affirm the person standing in front of you. And in those halls, a read was not just an insult, it was an x-ray, a precise naming of the truth. Shade was the art of wounding without drawing blood, of saying what you meant without giving Rome or Carthage or any watching empire evidence to use against you. Slay. Yas. It's giving. These were not born in corporate meetings. They were chanted in black queer spaces, shouted over beats, typed on black Twitter to celebrate someone surviving a world that told them they should not exist. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. Because by the time you finish this, you will feel it. The distance between how these words were forged and how they are now consumed. On Vine, a black girl's voice sang, "On Fleek could circle the world," while she remained unpaid. On Tumblr, black users built reaction GIF languages, entire emotional dictionaries that later became the default tone of the internet. On Twitter, black users sharpened woke, lit, period, until those words carried political memory and spiritual warning. Then TikTok arrived and the pattern repeated. Non-black creators became the faces of dances, of catchphrases, of entire ways of speaking. Articles named them pioneers. Brands handed them campaigns. Meanwhile, the people whose lives made this language necessary were blurred into a vague internet culture, reduced to caricature when they appeared at all. That is the first truth most people miss. You speak this language. You say period, slay, yas, it's giving, without ever having walked into a ballroom, without ever having followed a hashtag through a night of protest, without ever being taught to honor the people who paid for those words with ridicule, with danger, with their lives. You do not just know English, you carry a tongue built on black survival, and you were never meant to feel that in your chest. The question is not whether you use these words. The question is what else you are repeating without knowing its origin. Because some of the phrases on your For You page do not just come from parties or memes or stand wars. They come from funerals, from courtrooms, from prison yards. And the next word on your tongue has a history you have been trained not to see. The algorithm loves black culture and forgets black people. Algorithms do not have ancestors. They do not have memory. They only have appetite. And by the time you finish this, you will feel it because the way your For You page moves is not neutral at all. The machine is trained on reaction, on watch time, on comments, on shares, on the tiny spikes in your heartbeat when a sound bite, a dance, a catchphrase hits you just right. It does not care who created it. It does not care what funeral, what courtroom, what prison yard it came from. Or say, it only asks, did people stay? Did people click? That is the first truth most people miss. So, a black girl in a bedroom in Atlanta builds a dance out of her own body's memory. Out of cheer practice and church aisles and block parties, she uploads it. Her friends duet it. The algorithm nods, takes note, but waits. Then, a non-black creator with lighting, with management, with a brand safe smile, copies that same dance move for move. The machine sees a familiar pattern on a more marketable face and opens the floodgates. Suddenly, the copy is on every For You page. Brands call. Morning shows invite. Headlines name the copier as the creator of the trend. You saw this with The Renegade. Jalaiah Harmon built that choreography. This land of timelines and feeds watched her work travel the world without her name on it until public outcry forced a correction. You saw it again when black creators led a strike, refusing to choreograph new dances for a Megan Thee Stallion track, and the app felt strangely quiet, exposed like a radio with the sound turned down, revealing how much of its power came from the people it refused to center. It is not just dances. On Fleek came from Peaches Monroe, a black teenager on Vine, one perfect phrase that carried the rhythm of AAVE, the history of black girls hyping each other up in mirrors and bathrooms and bus stops. Brands printed it on shirts, on eyebrow kits, on billboards. She watched the world cash out on her syllables while she asked the internet to help her pay for a car. This digital erasure is not new. It is a new interface for an old script. There were radio stations that played black music all day but would not hire black DJs. There were magazines that filled their pages with black style, black slang, black cool, while the writer's room and the editor's chair stayed white. There were record labels that took the sound of this land, pressed it into vinyl, and handed the credit to faces that would not scare advertisers. The algorithm is just Rome with better data, expanding its reach, extracting what it wants, erasing who it fears. You need to see that the system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed in a world where black culture is seen as infinitely usable, infinitely remixable, while black people are treated as optional, replaceable, removable. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning with the present. And if the machine keeps choosing the copy over the source, the echo over the voice, you have to ask, who taught it to do that? And whose name is missing from your feed right now? From classroom to corporate, how the same words change value with skin tone. So when the algorithm prefers the echo over the voice, it does not stop at your feed. It walks into your classroom. It sits in your office. It puts on a suit and pretends to be neutral. Picture this. A black student in the back row says softly, "I'm finna go," when the bell rings, or sighs. That test was mad hard. The room hears it, but the institution answers. Speak correctly. That's not professional. You'll never get a job talking like that. The words are marked, underlined, turned into a warning label attached to that child's body. Now let us go back, but forward in time. Same language family, same rhythm, different skin. You are in a meeting, fluorescent lights, quarterly reports, the quiet hum of corporate air conditioning. A white coworker leans back and laughs. "I'm dead," after a joke, or mutters, "This meeting is low-key trash." The room cracks up. You're hilarious. You're so relatable. The same patterns that once triggered discipline now signal charm, authenticity, culture. That is the first truth most people miss. The value of the word is not in the vowel. It is in the mouth it comes from. Schools, workplaces, courts, all the great gatekeepers of this land have written an invisible grammar book where standard English is neutral, intelligent, professional, while AAVE is defective, emotional, dangerous. Linguists have proven the opposite, that AAVE has rules as strict as Latin, that the habitual sabi is a precise marker of ongoing state, not a mistake. But institutions do not grade you on linguistics. They grade you on obedience. There were classrooms where "I'm finna go" meant detention. There were courtrooms where "he be doing that" was read as proof of ignorance, unreliability, criminality. There were performance reviews where a black employee's natural cadence was called unpolished, too urban, not a culture fit. And at the very same moment, there were stages, there were sitcoms, There were viral tweets using the same grammar as entertainment, as flavor, as profit. Watch what brands do. When Stay Woke travels from black spiritual and political warning to hashtag, you see it on t-shirts, soda cans, marketing campaigns. When we did that, or it's lit catch fire, corporations rush to sprinkle them across billboards as if a language were glitter to be thrown over a product. But inside those same companies, black workers are coached to tone it down, to sound more professional, to leave their mother tongue at the door if they want promotion, safety, survival. Language changing is not the crime. Civilizations have always traded words, shared rhythms, remixed meanings. The crime is in the accounting. Who pays the price when a phrase is young, raw, and mocked? And who cashes in when it becomes mainstream, sanitized, and safe? Who is suspended and who is sponsored? By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. If the words themselves are celebrated on TV, in ads, in your favorite feeds, then the question haunts the room. What exactly is being punished when black people are told on this land not to speak that way? Why black slang always becomes mainstream, the core patterns. So what is really being punished? It is not the syllables. It is not the sounds. It is the people. And once you see that, the pattern of black slang in this land stops looking random and starts looking like a machine. This is how the machine moves. Black communities under pressure, under surveillance, under law, create language. New grammar, new rhythm, new meanings for old words, built out of African memory, Southern soil, and urban fire. That is the first truth most people miss. AAVE is not broken English. It is a full system with rules as strict as Latin, with a habitual B that marks ongoing reality, with double negatives that follow the logic of many African tongues. It is survival speech, spiritual speech, house-to-house code. Then the policing comes. Teachers write it in red. Bosses call it unprofessional. Judges hear it as guilt. Kids are suspended for saying finna or they be tripping, while those same patterns are quietly mined for jokes, for memes, for relatable content. The language is treated as a crime scene while the world steals the evidence. But under that pressure, something else happens. Underground cool, in the juke joints of blues, in the jazz clubs, in hip-hop ciphers, in TikTok corners the algorithm pretends not to see. Black speech becomes the sound of edge, of youth, of tomorrow. There were jazz musicians turning cool into a philosophy. There were MCAs turning dope and bad upside down. There were black teens making on fleek in a 6-second vine, giving the world a phrase brands would later print on t-shirts without paying the girl who named it. Then the cycle accelerates. Media and youth grab it first. White kids repeat it in hallways. Influencers caption it. Late night hosts perform it. Non-black mouths become the filter that makes the language safe. Once enough distance exists between the word and the black tongues that birthed it, brands arrive. They sanitize woke into a vague slogan. They drain lit and slay of their context. They sell you the flavor and erase the kitchen. Mainstream culture is always hungry for newness, for edge, for a way to feel alive in a world of recycled images. But it is afraid to sit with black grief, black rage, black power. So it takes language instead. It separates the art from the artist, the slang from the speaker, the sound from the soil. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. That time lag, you see, what was ghetto in 2005 becoming iconic nostalgia in 2020 is not an accident. It is a waiting period, a quarantine, until Rome feels the Numidians are no longer a threat, until this land's most feared people are turned into retro decor. You need to see that by the time you finish this, you will feel it. A society that fears blackness but craves black creativity will always repeat this cycle unless you confront the next, most uncomfortable layer. What this hunger for the word, but not the people, reveals about you. Language as extraction. Who profits from black words? So let us go back, not across oceans this time, but into the mind under your feet. Because when you talk about black slang, you're not talking about random noise. You're talking about a resource, a vein of gold running through this land that most people only see once it has been dug up, polished, and sold back to them at a markup. Black neighborhoods, black timelines, black group chats are treated like Carthage and Nubia were treated by Rome, sites of raw material. There's music there, there is style there, there is language there. There are people who bend English until it can carry grief, comedy, rage, and joy in a single syllable. And circling overhead are corporations, media executives, influencers, algorithms, waiting for the next word to break the surface. The chain is almost mechanical. A phrase appears in a black barbershop, in a Southern church parking lot, in a teenager's Vine or TikTok. It lives there first as an inside joke, a survival code, a way to say, I see you in a world that refuses to see. That is the first truth most people miss. By the time you hear it, it is already old to the people who made it. Then the mind is opened. A bigger creator hears it, repeats it, cleans it up for the camera. The accent softens. The context disappears. A dance challenge is born. A sound goes viral. A brand's social media manager takes notes. Soon the same word that held the weight of police sirens and school suspensions is floating on pastel graphics and cute fonts. From there, the extraction becomes open pit. Agencies pitch campaigns, put slay on the billboard, put woke in the headline, pepper the script with period and it's giving, so the show feels authentic. Merch drops, hashtags trend, conferences get panels on internet language. But you need to ask the question that cuts through all the noise. Where does the money go? Who gets paid when a streaming platform builds whole marketing strategies on an AAVE cadences, while black kids are still marked as unprofessional for speaking the same way at work? Who's credited when On Fleek sells makeup, when Stan drives fandoms, when Lit and Dope move sneakers and festival tickets across the world? Not just know it, feel it in your chest. The people who dug the mine rarely own the mine. This is not new. This land has seen this pattern before. Enslaved labor-built economies while the enslaved died nameless. Jazz, blues, rock, hip-hop were treated as noise until they became global industries, and then the contracts, the masters, the catalogs flowed upward, away from the origin. Language is simply the newest frontier, another territory where black creation is treated as common ground until someone fences it off and charges admission. And you are not outside this. Every time you repeat a word stripped of its source, every time you follow the copy instead of the creator, you stand at the edge of that mine. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. You do not need to freeze in guilt, but you need to choose. Will you help deepen the abstraction? Or will you start tracing words back to the mouths that first gave them power? names credit, and the violence of erasure. So when a word is mined and you stand at the edge of that mine, you are not just looking at vocabulary, you are looking at a trail. Every word has a birthplace, every phrase has a people, every rhythm in the way you say be or finna or on God has a history behind it, a community behind it, a story carved into it by survival and joy and grief. That is the first truth most people miss. Because on the internet, words are treated like they just appear. A meme page posts it. A white influencer repeats it. A brand slides it into a campaign. Suddenly, it is internet slang, Gen Z language. Well, how the world talks now. The origin is blurred on purpose. The people are blurred on purpose. When you erase the journey of a word, you erase the journey of the mouths that made it necessary. Let us go back, not to Rome or Carthage or the Numidians, but to another battlefield of naming. Colonizers stepped onto this land and renamed rivers, mountains, entire civilizations as if they were empty. They misnamed peoples, miswrote histories, misdrew borders, and the world was ordered around those lies. The same logic moves through language, misnaming lands, mislabeling histories, misattributing black language. In each case, power decides what something will be called and who will be remembered when the story is told. Credit is not about ego. Credit is about narrative control. When woke is stripped of its black political and spiritual roots and turned into a late night punchline, the people who birthed it lose their power to define their own awareness. When On Fleek makes millions for brands, while the black girl who named it watches from the sidelines, that is economic theft, not a harmless trend. When AAVE is called broken English in school, then sold back as edgy marketing language, a whole community is told it can entertain but never author the world. You need to understand the emotional violence in this. Imagine hearing the way your grandmother talks, mocked on TV, then echoed in boardrooms by people who would never hire her. Imagine being told in classrooms and job interviews to sound professional, to leave your home language at the door, then watching that same language walk back in wearing a costume on a viral TikTok. For black people, their tongue becomes a joke, a costume, a branding tool, everywhere except where it was first holy. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. If naming can wound like that, naming can also heal. If erasure is engineered, remembrance can be too. The question now is, what happens when you stop calling Black English and Black slang by their true names and treat them not as trends, but as the language of a people who have always shaped this land and this world? Stay with this, because that is where we are going next. Calling it what it is, AAVE, Black English, and reclaiming the label. So let us call it what it is. Not just Black slang, not random internet talk. What most people throw around as a trend has a name, has several names. African American Vernacular English, AAVE, Black English, African American English. This land has always tried to shrink it down to a joke, but linguists, elders, and anyone really listening know better. This land was never one language. That is the first truth most people miss. When you hear he be working or she stay doing that, you are not hearing mistakes. You are hearing grammar, system, pattern. You are hearing a dialect with rules as consistent as the Latin that built Rome, as deep as the languages that carried the spirituals, the blues, hip hop, and every sound that shook the world. AAVE is not broken English. It is English rebuilt under pressure. reforged under slavery, segregation, and survival. You need to understand what a name does. When you say AAVE, you are not just labeling speech, you are recognizing a people. You are saying, this is a legitimate dialect with history and power, worthy of study and respect. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Not just know it, feel it in your chest. Because this is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning with the way language has been used to crown some and criminalize others. Naming opens doors that silence keeps locked. When schools admit AAVE exists, educators can design curricula that meet Black students where they are instead of punishing them for the language they inherited. When linguists call it African American English, they can walk into courtrooms and say, you are mishearing this witness, you are misjudging this defendant, you are discriminating against a dialect, not detecting a lie. Policy changes when the language has a name, and identity changes too. When a Black child hears, this is Black English, this is ours, shame loses ground. Pride enters. They can see themselves not as people who can't talk right, but as inheritors of a living tradition that has fed jazz, fed soul, fed hip hop, fed the very internet language the world now worships. Now, look at yourself for a moment. If you have been saying woke, on fleek, it be like that without knowing the name AAVE, you have been walking through someone else's house without learning whose home it is. You have been praising the architecture while ignoring the people who built it, who paid for every brick in blood and laughter and survival. Reclaiming the name is the first step toward reclaiming the story. Once you can say, this is AAVE, you can ask, who speaks it? Who created it? Who deserves to be centered when it is discussed, taught, or sold back to the world? And once you ask that, the next question comes, what happens when this language leaves the house it was born in and is mined, polished, and sold by everyone else? That is where we go next. So, what do you do with this knowledge? When language leaves the house it was born in, you have a choice. You can be another hand stripping it for parts, or you can be a witness who says the name of the people who built it. By the time you finish this, you will feel it, because this is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. Language will always travel. It moves the way rivers move, cutting new paths, flooding new ground, refusing to stay inside borders drawn by empire or comfort. That is the first truth most people miss. The goal is not to build walls around words and lock them away. You need to build awareness, to build respect, to remember that every internet joke and every trendy phrase has a house, a street, a people it came from. So what do you do with that? You stop pretending slang appears out of nowhere. When you say on fleek, you say Peaches Monroe, the Black teen whose vine was mined while brands cashed in. When you hear woke, you remember it was a warning inside Black communities long before it was a punchline on television. You do not just repeat the word, you trace the lineage. You say the origin out loud. In the world of algorithms, that tracing is power. Follow the Black creators whose phrases you use. When a dance, a meme, a sound blows up, you ask, who did this first? Whose mouth did this language walk out of? Then you amplify that person on purpose. Share their page, cite their act, comment their name when others erase it. Small gestures repeated by millions shift the current that keeps credit flowing away from the source. If you are not Black, you need to pause before you wrap yourself in AAVE like a costume. Ask yourself, am I speaking or am I performing a caricature of blackness that the world taught me? Would I talk like this in a room full of black elders, black teachers, black peers from the communities this language comes from? And if someone comes for those same communities offline, are you ready to stand there? Or do you only stand with the words when they are fashionable and safe? If you are black, hear this clearly. Your language is an inheritance, not a liability. This land taught you, your people shaped English into a survival code, a music, a shield. When schools call it broken, you have the right to push back, to say, this is a full system. This is history speaking. In workplaces, in creative rooms, you can demand translation, not erasure, respect, not ridicule. These choices look small. How you caption a video, who you tag, which voice you imitate. But small currents carve canyons. When you speak with credit, when you consume with intention, when you refuse to laugh while black language is stripped of black people, you push against a system that treats black sound as disposable. And once you start pushing, another question rises. Who built that system and whose silence keeps it alive? That is where we go next. Unlearning the joke. Hearing black language with new ears. You've laughed at it. Most people have. The viral skit where someone acts ghetto. The meme with the exaggerated period. The sitcom character whose whole personality is loud, AAVE, and rolling eyes. The world trained you to hear black language as a punchline, not as a record of survival. That is the first truth most people miss. Let us go back, not in years, but in your own memory. Think about the first time you heard "I'm dead" or "it's giving" or "no cap," and it made you laugh. You repeated it with your friends. You threw it under a selfie. You typed it in all caps. You consumed it the way Rome consumed Carthage, as something to enjoy, to conquer, to use, without ever being asked to honor the people who built it. The joke landed. The history did not. Because these are not random sounds. They are pressure-built phrases, forged in communities that have had to turn pain into wit, danger into timing, fear into timing, and flair just to stay alive in this land. Period is not only emphasis, it is a closing of the case in a world that rarely lets black people have the final word. "I'm dead" is not only laughter, it is a tiny spell that flips the script, mocking the same death that has stalked black neighborhoods for generations. You need to hear that, not just know it. Feel it in your chest. The next time "it's giving" slides out of your mouth, pause. Ask, what is this phrase carrying? Whose rhythm is in this sentence? Whose grandmother's porch? Whose crowded bus ride? Whose lunch table at a black high school held this language long before it hit your timeline? When you type "no cap," remember that it was not born on the internet. It was born in real mouths, under real pressure. This is the shift from consuming black language as entertainment to honoring it as expression. When you hear "woke," do you only hear a meme? Or do you hear the older warning inside it, the call to stay spiritually and politically awake in a world that hunts you? When you sat on fleek on a brand campaign, do you see the black teen who coined it, who watched corporations drain her phrase for profit while giving her almost nothing? This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning, and reckoning hurts. Unlearning is not gentle. Stings. That sting you feel when you replay all the memes you shared, all the accents you mimicked, all the times you laughed along while black speech was flattened into a costume. That sting is the feeling of taking something seriously that the world told you was just a joke. Do not run from it. Sit in it. Let it do its work. Because this is not about perfection or purity. You will slip. You will say a phrase without thinking. But moment by moment, you can choose to be less careless with other people's culture, to credit, to listen, to ask before you borrow. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. Every casual period is brushing against an entire buried system. And if language has been used this way, to extract and erase, then you already know the next question. What else, besides words, has been taken, polished, and sold back to you without its people? This was never just about words. So let us go back, not to the first meme or the first viral sound, but to the first lie. The lie that this was just about words, just about slang, just about what is cool on the internet this year. That is the first truth most people miss. This has never been a quirky tour of phrases. This has been a walk through how a society treats the people it depends on for its culture. Look at the pattern one more time, clearly without flinching. Black communities create under pressure, under laws, under surveillance, under low wages and high walls. They create in barbershops and basements, on front porches and street corners, in churches and clubs and tiny bedrooms with cracked phone screens. The world laughs at them first, calls their speech broken, ghetto, improper. Then the cameras turn. Then the labels listen. Then the platforms notice. The same phrases move from the block to the track, from the track to the timeline, from the timeline to the marketing meeting. Suddenly, the world copies. Suddenly, the jokes are relatable. The captions are engaging. The campaigns are bold. Brands tweet in AAVE. Influencers sprinkle period, on fleek, woke, slay like seasoning. Money appears. Campaign budgets, sponsorships, brand deals. The world cashes in. And when the checks clear, the names disappear. The girl who said on fleek first. The organizers who held stay woke as a shield. The neighborhoods that forged this sound. Forgotten until the next generation on the next platform under the same pressure creates again. This is not random. This is a pipeline. From black mouths to global markets, from black survival to global slang. Behind every phrase is a mouth, a body, a neighborhood, a lineage. There were people who got suspended for talking like this in school. There were people whose job interviews ended the moment they opened their mouths. There were people whose very accents were used as evidence that they did not belong. When you strip the word from the people, you are saying the product matters more than the producer, that the sound is welcome, but the source is not. You need to sit with what that means, because this language is not just clever, it is testimony, it is code, it is armor. AAVE is a record of centuries, as precise and structured as any so-called standard, born from people who were never supposed to read, write, or name themselves. By the time you finish this, you will feel it. You do not just speak English. You speak echoes of black survival, whether you knew it or not. So there is pride here. Pride that in a world that cages, censors, and copies them, black people still make beauty out of constraint, still turn pressure into poetry, still reshape the way the world talks about power, joy, pain, love. But there is grief too. Grief that this land of language has been mined like a resource, that they have watched their own voices turned into trends with no credit, no protection, no return. Now, you stand at a crossroads. You have seen the pattern. You cannot unsee it. The only question left is what you will do with that sight. Will you keep repeating the cycle, Or will you learn to hear the people in the words you use and let that change what you honor next? Your mouth, your timeline, your move. You cannot unsee it, so you cannot speak the same way and pretend you do not know. Your mouth is not innocent anymore. Every word you throw into the world now carries a history you have heard. So here's where you start, not with guilt, with honesty. You need to turn that same gaze you put on this land, on Al Kabulin, back onto your own tongue. Take 3 slang words you use all the time. Not yesterday, not in theory, the ones you actually say. Dead ass, low key, it's giving, on fleek, woke. Write them down, then go look. Who said them first? Which people? Which communities? What did those words mean before brands and algorithms washed them clean? By the time you finish this, you will feel it. That is the first truth most people miss, that your everyday language has a genealogy. Do not keep that search private. Put what you find in the comments. Name the word, name the people, name the origin. Turn the comment section into an archive, a record of where your mouth has been traveling without a map. There were people who coined those phrases on vines that vanish. There were people who birthed those cadences in barbershops, on porches, in churches, in cipher circles. When you trace your language back, you pull those people out of the algorithm's shadow and into memory. Now, your timeline. The way you share is also a language. If you send this video, do not send it for clout. Send it as respect. Send it to the friend who loves to tweet AAVE, but has never learned the name AAVE. Send it to the coworker who sprinkles woke into jokes, but has never sat with the 1930s blues, singers and organizers who use that word as a warning to stay conscious in a world built to put Black people to sleep. Sharing becomes an offering when you say, learn where your words come from. Then your attention. You quote Black slang. You lip sync Black audio. You move through trends built on Black rhythm. Follow the people whose language you already live in. Follow Black creators who are not just the face of a dance, but the mind behind a phrase, the heart behind a joke, the witness behind a story. Support them with your views, your comments, your money when you can. This is power redistribution, not charity. Here is a simple practice, a small ritual with enormous weight. Before you repeat a new phrase, pause. Ask, whose mouth did this come from first? Ask, am I honoring that or erasing it? If you cannot answer, go find out. Let that question slow you down, because speed is how Rome erased Carthage, how empires erased civilizations, how platforms erased the Black girl who said on fleek before the world did. Understand this clearly. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning, not just with this land, but with your own speech. Every time you open your mouth, every time you open your app, you are choosing what kind of world you are speaking into existence. You can keep speaking a language that mines Black life and leaves the people behind, or you can choose to remember, to credit, to follow, to protect your mouth, your timeline, your move. The next word you say will tell the truth about which side you are on.